45% of adults are single in this country, and we do not have 45% single adults in our churches. We are missing a major chunk of our communities, and it's devastating to me.
And I agree with my sister. I think a lot of it is driven by economics.
I really think it is.
Because it's not only that they don't give, but if they're single families, there's a lot more demands that it's going to represent.
It's a lot more work.
Yeah.
So I think what's difficult for us to think through then is kind of where do we go from here. So a lot of talk has been happening since about 2004, 2005. Christian Smith, some of you might be familiar with him, and he did a national study on youth research. And he is kind of the one that's been buzzing for 9 years, everyone's been talking about, because he's tracked all this data of how much young adults are leaving the church once they graduate from high school. And everyone's just in a tizzy about it. And the major conclusion has been is because we haven't taught our youth how to think critically and how to think biblically. So then they get out in the world and they don't know how to engage in the world, and the church seems irrelevant to them. I would say that that's only half true. I would say the other half is because the church is not scratching where people itch. It's not speaking to their reality. It's speaking to the reality of young families. And it's not talking about the things or reflecting. Again, like I said at the very beginning, are adult singles, all of these people, are they walking into a church and seeing themselves? But now, I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth right now, because I'm also going to say, is the church supposed to reflect society? No. We should be setting the tone in society. But you have to give people a place to land. Are we sanctuary? Are we a safe place? Are we hospitable? Are we welcoming the stranger? People want to see themselves in the community that they're being invited to enter. And we give them one picture: married families. So we've got to figure out what it's going to be the kingdom of God. So I gave it away earlier, and this is the big one that I want to say, is that for the first time in recorded human history, women do not have to get married financially. They are independent. That is going to change the power dynamic and the whole dynamic of marriage. I don't even know where that's going to go. I also think we have to also look at the one-child policy in China, which is also expanding in other parts of the world, and how lopsided other parts of the world are becoming. And I think we're in for a really wild ride when it comes to marriage and family in the future. The National Center for Education and Statistics are saying that 57% of college students are female. And in grad school, this one's crazy, 61% of all master's degrees are female, and 51% of all doctorates. Again, women are not needing to get married, and they're actually getting educated at a higher rate, which is going to create even more interesting dynamics when it comes to the way our society works, the way we speak. Why is it that so many churches ask women to only help out in children's ministry when they have PhDs? Yeah, thank you. It's hilarious because it's crazy. Okay? So we have to be thinking about what we have to offer them. 51%, these are a bunch of random statistics, but this is all part of it. 51% of last year's college graduates are employed. And only 40% of them are in jobs that required a college degree. So here's more dynamics that are going to change. I believe that high school students are not going to be automatically going away to college in the numbers that they have been. I also know that college students are going to be coming home. What does the church have for them? When kids are having to come home after being away at college, do we just provide singles groups? I really don't think that's the solution. And again, I know that I'm asking questions that we don't have answers to. Women live on an average of 10 to 15 years longer than men, so we're going to have an inordinate amount of female widows in our churches. and it's estimated that between 25 and 30 years, Social Security is going to run out. What's the church going to do with all the widows who we've been called to take care of? Do we have the money for that? Doesn't it make you all want to go into vocational ministry? So the other part that I'm not even touching on, and I'm embarrassed because this is an area that I care about a lot, is I'm not even talking about that much of this issue cross-culturally. I have Latino and Latina friends who feel so much pressure to get married because culturally that is their family expectation. But they've gone to college and they're like, why are you going to college? You just need to get married. I have Asian American friends who are expected to live at home until they get married. What's this going to look like as they are single, bridging cultures? So the hardest part about the singles and why most people want to run away from singles ministry is because it deals with college grads, careers, divorced, single parents, and widows and widowers. So what ministry can cover all those groups? I mean, there's not one ministry that can, right? So I don't necessarily have a solution, but I want to end with yet another article. I'm a big fan of just following the media. I'm sure that's come from years of working with youth. Because there's not much research on some of the realities that I'm experiencing, I want to pay attention to the world around me and see what the world is saying about culture. I get online the New York Times, just the email version every day. In between Christmas and New Year's, they had an article every day about the church. The New York Times, which if you read the New York Times, is not exactly a spiritual publication in any way. But between Christmas and New Year's, every day they had an article about Christianity and faith. I think the world has got some questions right now, especially, I think, very much prompted by Newtown. The decline of evangelical America. It hasn't been a good year for evangelicals. I should know. I'm one of them. In 2012, we witnessed a collapse of American evangelicalism. The old religious right largely failed to affect the Republican primaries, much less the presidential election. Last month, Americans voted in favor of same-sex marriage in 4 states, while Florida voters rejected an amendment to restrict abortion. Much has been said about conservative Christians and their need to retool politically, but that is a smaller story riding on the back of a larger reality. Evangelicalism as we knew it in the 20th century is disintegrating. Just building on what you said earlier, it's a different world. I grew up hearing tales of my grandfather, a pastor, praying with President Ronald Reagan at the White House. My father, also a pastor, prayed with George W. Bush in 2000. I now minister in my congregation, which has grown to about 500, a tenfold increase in the last 4 years by God's favor and grace. But like most young evangelical ministers, I am less concerned with politics than with the exodus of my generation from the church. This is why I'm so passionate about this topic. Studies from established evangelical polling organizations have found that a majority of young people raised as evangelicals are quitting the church and often the faith entirely. As a contemporary of this generation, who is 30, I embarked 3 years ago on a project to document the health of evangelical Christianity in the United States. I found that the structural supports of evangelicalism are quivering as a result of ground-shaking changes in American culture. This is what we are observing right now. Strategies that served evangelicals well just 15 years ago are now self-destructive. The more that evangelicals attempt to correct course, the more they splinter their movement. In coming years, we will see the old evangelicalism whimper and wane. First, evangelicals, while still perceived as a majority, have become a shrinking minority in the United States. In the 1980s heyday of Reverend Jerry Falwell's moral majority, some estimates accounted evangelicals as a third or even close to half of the population. I mean, just side note, I became a Christian in 1976, and the cover story on Time magazine that year was 1976, the year of the born again, because Jimmy Carter was president and he was a born again Christian. Think of where we are now. Research by Notre Dame sociologist, who I referenced earlier, Christian Smith, recently found that Christians who call themselves evangelicals account for just 7% of Americans. Other research has reported that some 25% of Americans belong to evangelical denominations, though they may not, in fact, consider themselves evangelicals. Dr. Smith's findings are derived from a 3-year national study, etc. They assess that American evangelicals now number around 20 million, about the population of New York State. California is 38 million. The global outlook is more optimistic as evangelical congregations flourish in places like China, Brazil, and sub-Saharan Africa. But while America's population grows by roughly 2 million a year, attendance across evangelical churches has gradually declined. And then it goes on to talk about the giving crisis. Okay, so then if you go to the bottom paragraph, the pulse of evangelicalism is also shifting in many ways for the good from American politics to aid for the global poor, as evidenced in books by Reverend David Platt, Max Lucado, Tim Keller. Evangelicals are still a sophisticated lot with billions in assets, millions of adherents, and a constellation of congregations, radio stations, and so on. But all this machinery distracts from the historical vital signs of evangelicalism to make converts and point to Jesus Christ. By those measures, this former juggernaut is coasting at best, if not stalled, or in reverse. And this last part is what I'm going to want to finish this with. How can evangelicalism right itself? I don't believe it can. At least not back to the politically muscular force it was as recently as 2004, when white evangelicals gave George W. Bush his narrow re-election. Evangelicals can, however, use the economic, social, and spiritual crises facing America to refashion themselves into a more sensitive, spiritual, and humble movement. We evangelicals must accept that our beliefs are now in conflict with the mainstream culture. We have to understand this. We cannot change ancient doctrines to adapt to the currents of the day, but we can and must adapt the ways we hold our beliefs with grace and humility instead of superior hostility. Can I get an amen to that? At least a little. The core evangelical belief is that love and forgiveness are freely available to all who trust in Jesus Christ. This is the good news from which the evangelical name, euangelion, is a Greek word meaning glad tidings or good news. Instead of offering hope, many evangelicals have claimed the role of moral gatekeeper, judge, and jury. If we continue in that posture, we will continue to invite opposition and obscure the good news that we are called to proclaim. So, we can go on and read that, but any thoughts? Responses, questions, pushback?